This happened about 8 years ago, when I was around 14. To set the stage, my parents were usually strict about me not staying home alone. They were the kind of people who double-checked doors, reminded me to lock windows, and usually left my older brother to keep me company if they both went out. That night was the exception. My grandparents were flying in late, so Mom and Dad had to make the airport run. My brother had a party to go to. For the first time in a while, the house was completely mine. Honestly, at 14 it felt like I'd won the lottery. I had the PlayStation, I had Call of Duty queued up, I had my best friend online in my headset, and I even ordered pizza. A whole night of gaming with nobody to nag me about bedtime. Hours flew by. It was just me, my controller, my friend trash talking in my ears, and the glow of the TV in the darkened lounge. At some point I checked the clock and realized it was almost 2 a.m. I didn't even care. It was the kind of night that feels like freedom. Then the doorbell rang. I remember pausing for a second, not scared, just confused. My first thought was simple. Mom and Dad must have forgotten the garage remote. That made sense. I actually got up and started walking toward the front door, ready to open it. But then I stopped. I don't know why. Call it instinct or a gut feeling, but something told me not to unlock that door. I froze with my hand hovering over the lock. And then all hell broke loose. The person outside went insane. They started pounding on the door with both fists, screaming at the top of their lungs to let them in. The whole frame shook with the force. The voice was raw, unhinged, the kind of screaming that comes from someone not in their right mind. I completely panicked. My brain just shut down. I couldn't even shout back. I froze in place, shaking until I remembered the house phone. I grabbed it and dialed 000, our version of 911. My voice was trembling so badly I could barely get the words out. At the same time, I fumbled for my mobile and called my parents because, well, I was 14 and terrified. Meanwhile, my friend was still in my headset. He could hear everything, the banging, the screaming. But I hadn't said a word to him yet. He kept asking me what was happening, his voice getting more and more frantic as the chaos unfolded in the background. Then just as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. I whispered into the phone, telling the operator it might be over. I actually let myself hope the guy had left, but no. The next noise was even worse. The loudest, sharpest bangs I had ever heard rattled through the house. He had picked something up. I later found out it was a garden statue, and was slamming it against a window, trying to smash his way in. Each impact rang out through the walls, and I swear with every hit I thought, this is it, the glass is going to break, and then he's inside. He kept screaming, demanding I let him in, voice hoarse and wild. By this point I had accepted that he was getting in one way or another. I remember standing there, clutching the phone, convinced I was about to face him alone. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. And then out of nowhere I heard commotion at the front door. Voices. The sound of it opening. It was my brother. He'd come home from the party with a couple of mates. They ran straight into the madness, tackled the guy, and literally threw him down our stairs just as the police finally pulled up outside. The man was shirtless, in his 20s, completely out of his mind. Later we found out he'd been high on some hallucinogenic drug. Apparently he'd been caught in the middle of a party down the road, fooling around with the birthday girl, got chased out, and bolted through the neighborhood until he wound up at our place. By the time the paramedics arrived, the adrenaline had worn off. We'd wrapped him in a blanket and given him water. The paramedics said if he'd been left outside another hour in that state, he probably would have died from hypothermia. In the end, we didn't press charges. His parents showed up later, distraught, and apologized over and over. They were genuinely shaken, and to their credit, they made sure we never heard from him again. But that night has stuck with me ever since. The way the pounding on the door felt like it was shaking through my chest. The way the silence after the first round of banging felt almost worse than the noise. And the sick, helpless feeling of knowing someone out of their mind was determined to get inside, and I had nothing but a phone between me and them. Even now, years later, I can still hear the sound of that statue slamming against the window. I can still remember standing frozen in the hallway, headset buzzing in my ear, police on the line, parents racing home, and thinking I was seconds away from the glass giving way. It's the closest I've ever come to real terror in my own home. This happened in the 1970s in Australia when I was about 14. We lived out in the suburbs, but back then, suburbs still meant a lot of open bushland. Big dark trees, long stretches without streetlights, and a kind of stillness at night that made every sound feel sharper. One evening, my mom and dad had gone out somewhere with my younger brothers and sisters, leaving me home alone. It wasn't a big deal at first. I'd done it before, though usually not at night. I was in my room, reading, with the house around me completely quiet. For a while it was great, the kind of peaceful night where you actually feel older than you are. And then I noticed it. At first it was just this faint sound, barely there but real. I stopped reading and tilted my head. The TV was off. We didn't have a radio in my room. The noise wasn't coming from outside either. It was definitely inside the house. My heart gave that sick little lurch, the way it does when you know something's wrong but you don't want to believe it. Suddenly everything changed. A minute earlier I'd been calm, stretched out with my book, but now the air in the room felt heavy and cold. I set the book down as quietly as I could and slid off the bed. My bedroom door was already open, thank God, because that door creaked like hell if you touched it. So I slipped into the hallway and stood there, frozen, listening. The sound was clearer out here, still faint, but definitely there. My stomach dropped as I realized it was coming from the kitchen. The problem was the only way to get to the kitchen was through the living room, which was dark and wide open. I forced myself to move. Every step felt enormous, so I stayed on the balls of my feet, trying not to breathe too loud. I crept around the corner into the living room, empty, nobody there. But the noise was louder now, and worse, I could tell what it was. Voices, 2 of them. And they weren't just random sounds, they were arguing. Low, harsh whispers, back and forth like a couple having a fight. I froze again. I must have stood there for 5 whole minutes, not moving a muscle, just staring toward the kitchen doorway with my heart slamming in my chest. I couldn't see anyone, but the voices kept going. That was the part that made my skin crawl. There was no pause, no shuffle, no human presence, just invisible voices trading sentences. Finally, I told myself I had to look. If I didn't, I'd never sleep again. So I crept forward, slower than I've ever moved in my life, even opening my mouth slightly so the sound of my breathing wouldn't give me away. I reached the doorway and leaned my head just enough to see inside. The kitchen was empty, completely empty. But the voices were louder now. I could almost make out the words. A sharp male voice, a sharper female voice. They were absolutely there, and yet the kitchen was bare. My mind was racing. I didn't believe in ghosts, not then and not now, but standing in that kitchen, I started to wonder if I was wrong. Because how else could there be 2 invisible people standing a few feet from me arguing? After another long moment, I realized the sound was coming from the direction of the stove. Our stove back then didn't have the flat ceramic tops you see now, it had the old coil burners, thick rings of steel. The sound seemed to be coming from the corner of the nearest one. I bent down, heart pounding, and pressed my ear close to the spot where the coil met the little metal fitting before the wire disappeared inside the stove. That was when it all made sense. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't intruders. The voices were real, but they weren't in the room. They were leaking through the wiring. Somehow the metal coil and the connection were acting like a radio receiver. What I'd been hearing was a talk show on some AM frequency, probably bouncing off the atmosphere and being picked up by the stove. When my parents got home, I showed them and my brothers and sisters. If you bent down and pressed your ear to that one coil, you could hear the muffled chatter of real people talking on a broadcast. It's funny now, but in that moment when I didn't know what it was, when I was just a kid in a dark house alone, it was the most terrified I have ever been. I'm 55 now, and I can honestly say that night, standing in the hallway thinking 2 strangers were arguing in our kitchen, was the most frightened I've ever felt in my life. I'm writing this because people keep saying my first post sounded dramatic. Here's the plain version. I lived alone last year in a small house that had 2 exterior doors, front with a deadbolt, back with an old knob and a latch. The back door sticks when it rains. That's relevant. On a Tuesday night in April, I woke around 3 a.m. because the hallway nightlight clicked on. It's a motion sensor. It only lights when someone moves near the kitchen or the back door. I lay still and heard the back handle turn, not wind. You can hear the metal scrape when it turns. It turned slow, stopped, turned again like someone testing how far it moves before the latch catches. I got out of bed, picked up my phone, and hit record. I stood in the hallway where I could see the kitchen and said, "Wrong house." Whoever was outside tried the handle again, harder. The latch rattled, then there was a shoulder hit. The whole door shivered. Second hit, louder. I braced the frame with my hip and pressed both hands against the door. I could feel the pressure change on the other side like someone leaning in steady, not drunk or frantic, just patient. I called emergency and gave my address. While I was on with the operator, the pressure stopped. Footsteps moved off the deck into the grass and along the wall to the bedroom window. A finger pushed on the screen. 4 taps on the glass, spaced like someone counting. I said, "Police are on the way." No answer, just breathing. Then quiet. When officers arrived, they checked the yard and the door. No prints on the glass. On the back door, they showed me scrape marks next to the knob like a tool had been used, and shiny metal on the strike plate where the bolt took hits. They told me to replace the hardware with long screws and a better latch. 3 nights later, at the same time, the motion light turned on again. No handle movement this time. Just a slow step on the grass outside the bedroom and a long exhale, like someone standing in the dark, getting used to the new door and deciding not to try it. I didn't sleep after that. I moved a dresser against the door and kept shoes by the bed. The neighbor across the alley told me his shed lock was broken that week. He thought it was raccoons. I didn't argue. A month later, I put up a camera facing the back door. At 3:02 a.m., it captured a shadow moving along the fence line and stopping at my gate. The figure stayed off to the side where the floodlight doesn't hit. You can see the gate shake one time, then nothing for an hour, and then the street camera down the block picked up a person in a hoodie walking away. Police said it matches other reports in our area. They didn't make an arrest while I still lived there. I sold the place in August. The video and report includes 2 stills, the scrape by the knob and the gate shake. People asked why I didn't open the door, because there was already someone trying to open it. After I moved, the buyer said the camera caught a pause by the bedroom window twice in September. They added bars on the screens. That's it. It happened. No twist. I keep a shoe by the bed.